You know, when you open up the Bible, you naturally think you're starting at page 1, right? The very beginning of everything. But what if I told you that the story of Genesis, Adam and Eve, the garden, what if that's not the beginning at all? What if it's actually Act 2 in a cosmic war that's much older and way darker than we ever imagined?
So let's just jump right into that question. We all know the famous words, "in the beginning." But what if the real story is buried right there in the text, hidden between the lines? A story that honestly, once you see it, might just change how you read everything that follows.
And this quote just nails it. The big idea here is that the story doesn't start with a peaceful garden and the first man. No, it starts with a lost prologue, a cataclysm that happened before Eden was even a thought, and a rebellion that literally scarred the heavens long before humanity took its first breath.
Okay, so here's our game plan for digging into this hidden history. We're going to look at the world before Adam. Then we'll dive into the war in heaven that left its mark on Earth. We'll meet the monstrous giants that came next, uncover the real reason for the Great Flood, and finally, see exactly where Adam fits into this whole cosmic conflict.
So, first things first, we have to get our heads around the idea that when time began, humanity wasn't the first audience. There were already witnesses to creation, beings way older, way more powerful, who saw it all happen.
And look, this isn't just some wild theory. It's right there in the scriptures. Before Adam ever opened his eyes, a cosmic choir, the sons of God, was already there, singing as the world's very foundations were being laid. I mean, here it is, plain as day. The book of Job describes this cosmic audience, the Ben Elohim, which translates to sons of God, shouting for joy at creation. Now think about it. Adam wasn't there yet. Humans didn't exist. So who exactly were these guys?
Well, their story, unfortunately, doesn't stay joyful for long. We all know how joy can turn to jealousy, and celebration can sour into rebellion. And to see what happened, you have to look really closely at this strange, mysterious gap between the first two verses of Genesis.
Do you see how jarring that is? Verse 1 is perfect, orderly creation, everything's good. But then boom, verse 2, the earth is suddenly a chaotic mess. It's formless and void. Now that doesn't sound like creation, does it? That sounds like devastation. The whole gap theory argues that something catastrophic must have happened right there, in between those two sentences.
So in this view, that chaos, that formless void, wasn't the starting point. It was the aftermath. It was the wreckage of a cosmic battlefield, a planet left scarred and broken by a divine judgment that followed a terrible rebellion. And who led this rebellion? A being known as Lucifer, the morning star. Get this, the prophet Ezekiel actually talks about him walking in a primordial Eden, a garden of fire and stone, long before the one we know. But his pride, his burning desire to be like the Most High, sparked a war in heaven. And, well, he and his followers lost, and they were cast down to earth, turning creation into a war zone.
But the war didn't just end there. Oh no. It just changed focus. A faction of these fallen beings decided to take their rebellion to the next level by directly interfering with the new kids on the block, the human race. Their plan was to corrupt us from the inside out.
Now, according to ancient texts, like the Book of Enoch, a group of 200 of these fallen angels, who came to be known as the Watchers, made a pact. They deliberately abandoned their posts in heaven and came down to earth with a single twisted purpose in mind. And what they did unleashed this just horrifying chain reaction. First, they descended. Then they started teaching humanity all this forbidden knowledge, how to make weapons, sorcery, stuff we were never meant to know. This led to them having children with human women, creating a monstrous new species. And finally, their offspring, these giants called the Nephilim, filled the entire world with unimaginable violence.
Genesis chapter 6 actually calls them the Nephilim, which can mean the fallen ones, the mighty men of old. But other texts, they paint a much, much grimmer picture. They describe them as these insatiable giants who consumed everything. Not just all the food and resources, but eventually, humanity itself.
And that brings us to the Great Flood. Now, we usually think of it as a punishment for sin, right? But if you look at it through this lens, it was something way more specific. It was like a desperate act of divine surgery to save the human race from being completely wiped out or corrupted.
And the key to understanding this is hidden in one little phrase used to describe Noah. When the Bible says he was perfect in his generations, it might not just be about him being a good guy. The interpretation here is that it's talking about his genetics, that his bloodline was pure, untainted by the angel human DNA that had corrupted pretty much the rest of the world.
So the flood becomes a kind of divine quarantine. It wasn't just about washing away bad behavior. It was about washing away a corrupted genome. It was a genetic war, a total reset on creation to preserve the pure human line in Noah's family, the very line that a future Redeemer was meant to come from.
Which finally brings us all the way back to Adam. See, in this timeline, he isn't the start of the story. He's God's answer to the problem. He's a strategic move in a war that was already ancient by the time he was made from the dust. Adam was put in the garden, and yeah, his job was to tend it, but it was also to guard it, to hold the line against an enemy that had already staked its claim on planet Earth. His creation was basically a divine counteroffensive, dropping God's own image-bearer right into the middle of occupied territory. And this sets up this incredible parallel that runs through the whole Bible. You have the first Adam, made from dust, who fails his mission in a garden and brings death into the world. But his story was always pointing to a last Adam. That's Christ, a life-giving spirit who would have his ultimate triumph in a garden, Gethsemane, and completely reverse the curse. And this isn't just me connecting the dots. The Apostle Paul says it outright. The failure of the first Adam just set the stage for the victory of the last one. From this perspective, the entire human story is about this incredible plan of redemption unfolding.
So Adam's fall in the garden wasn't the end. In a way, it was just the start of a new phase of the war. Human history itself becomes the battlefield. You know, every empire that rises, every kingdom that crumbles, it's all just a ripple on the surface of this much deeper, invisible conflict between these fallen powers and God's plan.
And that leaves us with one last pretty intense question. If this ancient war never really stopped, if the world we're living in right now is still contested grounds, what does that mean for us? What role do you and I play on this cosmic battlefield today?